Could I get a volunteer to take some notes in the agenda document?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you, Chris. Managed to remember to ask this time. Okay, cool. Let's start it off. Let's start with a quick rundown of recent and upcoming releases. Eric, do you want to talk a bit about what we're doing there?
Yep, sure. So the 3.12 release has been out for a little bit now. As far as I know, we don't have any issues raised against it yet. If anyone knows of any, please mention it, or even better, create an issue. Some of the notable features was OpenShift 4.2 support with the operator. Also IPv6 service advertisement, auto detection of IP tables backend. But I was just actually checking. I don't know that that is enabled anywhere except for the operator right now. So that's probably the only place anybody to hit that. And then there was some rule metadata that I find trouble that it would raise issues unless somebody just didn't like the way we did it. So I think that's all for 3.12. It's been looking good. Nothing coming in. For 3.13, it is targeted for the end of February or early March. We don't quite have the scope worked out, so that's still being determined. But one thing we do have in is auto detection for CIDR on kubeadm. It's kind of something that we would like to expand more so that, you know, the user or whoever's setting things up doesn't have to configure the pod CIDR. We can just auto detect it from the system that we're running on. But that's a first step, good first step there. And then I think there's a few other bug fixes that we've got going in. You know, just small things we've been picking up. I think, I mean, Spike's been doing some bug work, and I think we got hopefully a few things from there. Yep. Also, for I guess a little bit farther ahead, for 3.14, we have a automatic host endpoint creation feature that we're trying to get in. But I think that's the only thing that we have targeted for 3.14 right now. But I think we're pretty sure that's not going to make it for 3.13, so that's why I'm saying 3.14. Some other stuff we have is there's been some docs reorg happening. I'm gonna hand that off to Turk to give us a little demo of that stuff. Are you ready, Turk? Or Daniel, as your name says.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah. Sound good?
Stop one. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to show off some changes that have been happening on the Calico docs. Some of this is some theming stuff and layout changes that I did demo a couple community meetings ago. But it's nice to see these finally getting into the latest stable release. So now when you go to the main site, you end up seeing them, which is pretty cool. And also there's probably one other thing I wanted to call out, which is that you'll notice that we're not on like a explicit version when we're at the root of the docs here. So this is the latest release of the docs v3.12, but we don't have a version in the URL, which is kind of nice. We're hoping it'll help out with SEO because if you Google search like Calico docs, you sometimes get links that point you to like v3.0 and v2.0, which is kind of sad. So now that pages aren't moving around, we expect to see an improvement there. And we don't have an explicit link to it yet. I'm still working on that, but we still do have v3.12 permalinks enabled. So we have like a second copy of the site, so you can still get to it. And if you need to link to a page without it changing, you can still do that, which is kind of exciting. But yeah, just a brief recap of, those theme changes that have gone in. We have these new layout pages that are these kind of nice landing pages instead of what was before really just like an empty page. And we have these, let's see if we can get to one, this nice scroll down menu on the right that gives you links to the headings and kind of follows you as you go down, which is pretty cool.
I just love it for getting links to subtopics on the pages.
Yeah, if you were like me, you used to like guess what they'd be, and you'd have to kind of like, write
Yep.
that yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, still hoping to eventually make it so when you hover, a link shows up here, but one thing at a time,
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's it. Any questions? Anything else that I missed?
Do you want to show off the, what are we calling them, geek details?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me think. So my coworker Alex added this recently. Oh, right, it's only on master. He was trying to come up with a way to kind of share more information about details without like bloating the entire page here. So we added these things called geeky details on a lot of the like Kubernetes install guides. So you get a layout of what options have been chosen for each Kubernetes layout. And if you want to know more about any of these, like what does cross subnet IP really mean, you can click on it and we get this modal pop-up using the Bootstrap, CSS Bootstrap framework that the doc site imports, which gives more information on, those individual things. So it gives you a chance to learn more, like I said, without bloating the page, which is pretty nice. Those are in master. Expect to see them come into the, probably going to backport them to the latest release as soon as we get them working perfectly. Cool. All right, I think that's it.
Very cool. Thanks, Eric. Eric, did you have anything else you wanted to say, or should?
I think that was all. Yeah.
Cool. So why don't we move on? Spike, do you want to walk us through some of the hot issues you've been looking at?
Sure. First one of these is an issue that is in progress. We kind of understand the root cause of it, but still don't have a fix. So this is an issue in libcalico go 1125, and I'll paste out a link into the notes. But the problem is that when people were running Calico for policy, but not Calico for networking, and trying to use the network in the Kubernetes post-start lifecycle hooks, they weren't getting any network connectivity. And we've kind of chased this down to being what we consider to be a bug in Kubernetes. That Kubernetes is blocking updating the pod IP during those post start lifecycle hooks. So Calico never learns the pod IP, can never set up the right network policy, and so the pod is just not allowed to talk on the network. So I'm kind of essentially in a harassment campaign of the SIG-node maintainers, basically showing up to their meetings every week and being like, hey, can we at least like decide how to fix this issue? And that's been going on for a while. So we're gonna continue that and hopefully get a fix there. Let me paste
Have they accepted that it might be a bug in the kubelet, or?
Yeah, I mean they pretty quickly like nominally accepted that it was a bug, but still have not been able to decide amongst themselves what the right way to fix it is, whether to make the post start hook completely asynchronous or whether to send a second or not a second but an additional pod status update, which they're worried about from scalability issues. Like, oh, what if every pod sends an additional pod status update? Is that going to burn down the cluster, I guess? So that's where we are with that one.
The pod updates, do those happen in the node lease? I guess they don't happen in the node lease. They happen somewhere else, huh?
I'm not sure what the node lease is.
Like I guess the pod Yeah, the pod status. If the kubelet is sending a pod status update, I would think it would be happening in that API object that the kubelet maintains. But it used to be a high cost to send that information, but I think now it's not a high cost anymore because there's an
Yeah, I think this is
explicit
just like you can send a specific API request that's a pod status update. It doesn't have to be part of a more expensive object. But they are still
okay.
concerned with how many of those they're sending, and they queue them up, and they have like a QPS budget and things like that. So I'm sort of making light of
Cool.
the fact that like they do take it very seriously how many requests they are sending to the API server.
Yeah.
For good reason.
Okay, cool.
But anyway.
I just have a quick question. Can I ask it now, Casey, or should I wait for later?
You can ask it now if it's relevant.
Too late, I guess I already asked. Okay, so it's in the post life cycle hook that you said the bug happens, right?
It's the post start life
It's
cycle.
the post start. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it only affects you if you are running Calico for policy, but not Calico for networking. If you're running Calico for networking, then we have other ways of getting this information. Basically, we do a runaround on the kubelet and post the pod IP in an annotation on the pod. But if we're not the CNI plugin, then we don't do that, and so we have to wait for the kubelet to tell us.
Cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's really useful for us as well. I just really appreciate you sharing that. Thanks.
Yeah. Next issue was discovered by one of our users. There's a resync issue in Taifa. So this is Calico Taifa issue 335. And even though Taifa was sort of nominally doing what it was supposed to be doing from a high level, this user noticed that we're sending a bunch of resyncs. Basically, we're dropping an error saying our watch failed and then doing a full resync every time the watch expired. And it was only for network policies and only with the Kubernetes data store driver. But it meant that we're using more resources on the API server, sending these somewhat ugly error messages into the Taifa log, and dug into it, and there was just a bug in the way that we are resyncing, or basically picking up watches on the network policy objects. And that bug was not in Taifa; it was actually down in libcalico go, meaning that it would also affect clusters that are running Kubernetes with the running Felix connecting directly to the Kubernetes API server with the Kubernetes data store driver. So we fixed that one, and now that should take care of that. And so we should get proper watches picking up on the resource version of what we've already processed and avoid these full resyncs. Thirdly, I wanted to point out there was a memory leak that was noticed in Taifa, where if you just let Taifa go for a while, it would just keep using more and more memory, and it took a lot of effort and sort of back and forth with the user who reported this. Actually, Svend, who's on the call. And I eventually tracked it down to a bug in Golang's HTTP2 library, at least the XNet version of this, where if you start a watch and that watch expires like on the server side, it's fine, you don't leak a resource. But if we cancel a watch, then you leak resources. And so this affects Taifa in certain circumstances. It would have affected or affects Felix as well. Anybody who's running this kind of bugged version of Go's HTTP2 library. So if anybody's watching resources in Kubernetes and canceling those watches, make sure you're on the latest version of API machinery, because the one that we were using back in the 3.8.0 days is bugged, but the ones that we have been using more recently, including patch releases to 3.8, so like 3.8.6 I know is on a non-bugged version of this. So if you're seeing that kind of behavior, either in your own Kubernetes code or in any of the Calico kind of things, update to the latest version, and you'll probably see better behavior there. And then that's all the ones that we actually have managed to fix, or the ones that I wanted to highlight about that we've managed to fix recently. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be focusing on in the next few weeks, which is around IPAM. So we did a lot of kind of deep dive on Taifa because we had noticed a couple of different bugs around Taifa. Now we're going to be starting a deep dive on IPAM, and a couple of different people have noticed ways that we could be leaking resources in IPAM, either IP addresses or IP blocks, not being freed under certain edge cases. So you could have resource exhaustion of your IP address space. So those issues are in Project Calico 23 or 2713 and 1195. Again, I'll put those links into the notes. But that's kind of where our attention is going to be in the next few weeks. All right, that's all I have for hot issues. Anybody else want to bring up any issues?
No, I think you covered them all, Spike.
All right,
That was
cool.
awesome. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Let's move on to Calico Heroes. So this gives us a chance to recognize our comrades and compatriots who have been doing an awesome job, whether it be code fixes or other things in the community. If anybody has seen somebody in the Calico land, Calico world doing cool stuff, now's a great time to recognize them.
Yeah, I wanted to recognize Svend, who's on the call. He's the one that pointed out the Felix or the Taifa memory leak, and also was willing to kind of help me dig into reproducing it and finding it. I had to ask him to go through a relatively onerous procedure to get some pprof dumps from Taifa, which then once I cracked open, actually put me on the right trail to find this memory leak in the HTTP2 library. So thank you very much, Svend. And the other person I wanted to recognize is not on the call, but I think he's actually in Europe, and so it's probably like 6 or 7 p.m. There. But his name is Stefan Breunig, and he not only noticed this resync issue in Taifa, but also developed a fix and a unit test and sent it to us in order to get that all fixed up.
That's awesome. I had one more person I wanted to throw on. Thomaso Posetti. He raised a incredibly detailed issue outlining the behavior he was seeing, and it actually included a proposed fix. He had gone in and dug into the Felix code to find out what was going on, which made it very easy for me to come along and say, yes, this is a real thing that we need to fix. So just that extra little bit of effort was incredibly useful, and found a pretty important bug in the VXLAN code. So thank you, Thomaso. Anybody else have any?
I got one.
Yeah.
Shaun was very helpful, and about a week and a half ago, and also who's the QA guy? I forgot his name.
Lance, maybe.
He's got a British accent. But he was really helpful with some of the policy stuff we're trying to improve in upstream to create like a broader thing, like I mentioned. Anyway, Shaun, a lot of that came from some ideas that Shaun shared with me about how the Felix truth table tests go and everything. And he was super helpful with that, gave me a lot of information, even pointed me at the code and everything else. So it was super helpful to me. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate being able to work with you all like across the pond, even when I'm not working directly on Calico. So I appreciate everybody at Sheriff and Calico in general for collaborating with us.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. and glad to have you in the community. So I'd like to do a little demonstration. So why don't I share this screen? Can you guys see this terminal okay? If I type words. Oh, looks good. Cool. So I wanted to show just very briefly the operator stuff that Eric was mentioning a little bit earlier that we kind of coincidentally released in 3.12. So for context, right now we've documented this for OpenShift v4.2 support. So you can go to the Calico docs and there are instructions for how to get.
Casey, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there any way you can make your font bigger? I think it's hard to read on my screen. I don't know if it's the same for everyone else.
How's this?
Oh yeah, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. It's hard to tell from this side. Where was I? Yeah, so we've documented this for OpenShift, but in practice it will work in a bunch of other environments as well. We're just kind of slow on rolling it out there in the docs. So what I'm going to show today is actually a kubeadm cluster. And I think I've got, 116 cluster going here. And just to show what state we're in, I've brought it up, but I haven't installed any networking or anything. So for those of you who might not be super familiar with operators, they're basically just another Kubernetes controller or set of controllers that you run on the cluster to manage a piece of software. So in this case, we have written one that manages a Calico installation. So it gives you kind of like a number of benefits, but one of them is that I'm excited about is just a tighter guarantee that you're deploying code that matches the configuration that it's been tested and designed for. So the current Calico install process, when you install like this daemon set, an issue that we see a lot of users hit is that over time that daemon set they're deploying diverges from the one that we are maintaining and providing in our docs. And that can lead to subtle or unexpected behavior. So by doing this all through sort of this life cycle management that's provided by the operator, we can sort of guarantee a tested compatible configuration. So the way this works is the first thing you do is you install the operator. And I split it up into a few manifests here, but it doesn't need to be. This just kind of highlights what things we're actually installing. So it gets a namespace, some CRs, custom resource definitions, and all the typical supporting resources, like a role binding, role service account, yada, yada, yada. And the operator itself is deployed as a deployment. So it just runs a single pod. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing special here. Runs a single host network pod, since networking won't exist at the time that this is created. So we can just go ahead and create all the stuff in that directory. And you should be able to see now we've got this pod running on the cluster. But if you look at all pods, we've still got these pending core DNS ones because we haven't actually installed networking yet. We've just installed the Tigera operator. So the installation itself is configured via a CR. This is a pretty minimal one, just to demonstrate sort of conceptually how this works. But this object sort of represents an installation of Calico. So creating this will trigger the operator to install Calico with the configuration that you've provided in it. So we've got some simple stuff in here, just setting which IP pools we want to exist, what MTU we want to use. So I go ahead and create this like so. We should see that the operator will spring into action and start to deploy all of the typical Calico resources that we know and love. One thing you might notice is that it's doing it in it's a little bit, doing it in the Calico system namespace. As part of this, we took the opportunity to really namespace the Calico resources separately from the cube system, just as a best practice. So those are all up and running now. The only other thing I wanted to show was just how you can do configuration changes. So I can go in and edit my installation. Say if I identified that I accidentally put the wrong MTU here, I can go ahead and edit this installation, and the operator is going to go and propagate that out onto the cluster. So that's just a simple configuration change, but you can imagine potentially more complicated things where the operator can take a very simple configuration change and turn that into arbitrarily complex operations that it needs to perform on the cluster. I think that's all I've got, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has them.
There's some version upgrade stuff, and as I recall, it's in Felix, right? That like checks the daemon set version. And if it's a minor version, like it tries to do an upgrade or something. Like if it's a major version difference, like from 2 to 3 or something. Just wondering if y'all are gonna try to move that into the operator. I hope you don't, but I'm just.
No, so I think I mean the version 2 to version 3 upgrade is a very long time in the past, and we're not trying to go that far back with the operator.
Yeah.
I mean, in practice, pretty much all Calico releases nowadays are very simple and don't require complicated migration logic. It's just a standard daemon set rolling update.
There's another thing I think that changed. There was a liveness flag that was added to it was a liveness check flag, and you changed one of the libraries, and then that changed the YAML. So I'm wondering if those changes, like, is that another use case you're going to use the operator for? Like, so like if you're going from one version to another, it'll patch the.
Yeah, exactly. So what I haven't shown here is what it does look like to upgrade from version X of Calico to version Y. But that process would look like basically doing this. Like you switch that to 1.2 and then reapply that. And that will give you both the new code. So whatever changes we might have made to the liveness probes, but also the corresponding, I guess what we can call manifests, but Kubernetes resource changes that go with that.
Cool, and that's going to straddle major releases too, you think, the operator? So it'll be able to go from 3 to 4 and.
Yeah, we don't have any intentions to do 4.0 in the near future, but
So it doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay.
when we, if and when we do get to that point, it should handle that.
Cool.
Cool. I think that's all I had. Jay, you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the network policy work you were doing upstream?
Yeah, I could. Does anybody else want to have any other operator stuff? Because I didn't even really prepare much, but I would like to just give a 5-minute, pulse on it. But are we sure that your stuff is done? Because I'm sure, there might be other questions. I don't know.
Seems like there are no more questions.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, Steph is here. She's helped me with some of this too. So let me just share. What's the best way to do this? I'll just share like a link to this because. So I'm not really sure what form this is ever going to take. Oh, I can just share my screen, right? Share screen. How do I do that? Here we go. I can maybe pull up some code here too. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Share. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so we've been playing around a lot, and this is again in huge thanks to the Calico folks for helping with this, in looking at like what network policy tests should actually look like and what they shouldn't do. And we found a lot of holes in existing policy tests. As you all know over at Tejera and anyone else in the network CNI community, when you're actually applying network policies at large scales, there's a lot of complicated stuff that aren't in the upstream tests. And in fact, when we ran the upstream tests, they broke. They don't actually pass. All of them don't actually pass. So that's a huge problem. But I don't think that in and of itself is a problem because you can fix that with a simple patch to upstream Kubernetes. The bigger problem is that it's clear that nobody's running those tests at large scales and really relying on them. And everybody's got different downstream tests. So that makes it hard for us, for example, to really verify that when we give Calico to our customers, we know that we're giving them a Calico that's configured correctly. And if they run into an issue, there's a way of measuring how we can really help them with that issue and stuff like that. That affects, of course, even our ability to do upstream work, right? Because we don't necessarily always know whether something's intentional or not. So we want to improve this stuff upstream and have a better testing story upstream for all the CNIs, and so that all the CNIs can kind of innovate above the stack instead of kind of below it, and and have upstream take care of a lot of the testing that the CNI is basically saying. So we've the first thing that kind of I did in this is just look at the existing tests and kind of audit them all for completeness. And I think this is like an example, like one of the network policy tests, one of the first ones, for example, it tests that one container can connect to a server in a different namespace and that another container can't connect to that server in a different namespace. But the entire connectivity matrix that you'd want to test looks more like something like this, right? You'd want to test both the ports, you'd want to test other things in other namespaces, you wanted to test, and there's other tests where we have situations where, like this one over here, where you want to test internal namespace connectivity, and for every, you don't want to have a situation where, you create a policy that allows one pod to talk to a particular pod in one namespace, but that policy isn't accurately preventing pods in the same namespace from potentially talking to the same pod or whatever. So there's all these different like combinatorial cases that kind of ultimately add up to essentially what one of the things we were talking about in the contributors room over at Calico, which ultimately come to a truth table, which was a term coined by coined over in the Calico chat by you all, by our QA friend, who I think he's not on this call. But what was his name again? Casey, I forgot his name.
Lance.
Lance, yeah. So Lance came up with this. He's like, yeah, what you're talking about is a truth table. And I'm like, yeah, okay, it's a truth table. So so this is really what you're looking at, right? Like for every test, you really, and I'll add to this with what Shaun helps me kind of brainstorm about. But so with every upstream network test, really what you want to do is you want to confirm that a certain type of connectivity exists, but also that no other types of connectivity exist. Now, the way this is done right now is it's one-off, right? So it looks a lot like, it doesn't look like, so that truth table is really a logical representation of this diagram here, where you're literally testing every container out of a union of all the types of namespaces and containers that you might want to create. But what the current upstream tests look like is more, again, like this. So back to the truth table, looking at this one again. There's another thing, though, that Shaun brought up, which is that in addition to not being complete, there's also huge performance problems. So if you test, you all know how good I am at breaking things, right? So like if you test like a broken CNI, right, and you run the network policy tests on it, it's going to run for 2 hours, just the network policy test. Okay, it's 24 tests, and the reason it does that is because it continuously polls. So those of you that aren't familiar with how the current network policy tests work in upstream, there's these utility methods that go off and they fire up a pod and it polls and polls and polls and polls and polls, and eventually it gives up. And if it gives up, that's either good or bad, depending on what you wanted, what the logical outcome you expected from your matrices. So another thing that Shaun had mentioned was, we should really move to an exec model. I think that would make these tests a lot more deterministic and easy to run, and maybe even faster. And it would also lend itself, I think, to a type of test that was a lot more hackable, right, in the long run. And so that's something else we've been thinking about. I haven't thought about exactly how to implement it yet. But the first thing I did was test whether or not you could create a white space based, a white list based representation of these tests instead of these extremely boilerplate heavy tests. So that's the way I implemented that to start, and I just did this for a few end-to-end tests that worked, was I just made a little builder thing that would build network policy objects for me, because without that, you need to make these huge, massive blobs of Go. So I just made a little builder thing that would build these for me, and then I just gave it a few functions, because every network policy test essentially does the same thing. Once you get rid of all the boilerplate, you could just see that from scanning over this, right? It adds an ingress, and the ingress basically has nothing in it other than a label or a port. And then, and so you can express these in like 1 line of code, right? 2 lines of code. So I went through all 24 tests and implemented those. And I kind of liked the way that worked. And it kind of gave me the confidence to be like, yeah, we should probably do this as like a broader thing upstream. So that's where I'm at. There's a lot more stuff I'd love to show you all at another time. But I still am trying to figure out upstream who all is interested in being a part of this and helping with it, because I think there's performance stuff and other stuff we want to do, which is making it into a broader initiative than just one-off patching of the tests. So I'm totally open to ideas of how we could do all this. Right now it's kind of written as a potential cap, but we'll see.
Jay, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You said that you wanted to move away from polling to an exec style test. Could you elaborate on what that means? I'm not sure that's a term that
yeah,
I know.
So there's a lot of tests in the end-to-end. Well, there's some tests in Kubernetes end-to-end that actually will literally use the Kubernetes API to like go off and exec into a container. I know the kubectl tests do that. I don't know what other ones do that. But like, so the nice thing about that is that if we created this scenario, so I kind of was playing around. This is very new, but I kind of created a little set of structs to kind of describe this at a high level. But if we created a set of structs that kind of modeled what pods were doing, and we set up a set of static pods that were just sitting around in these namespaces all day, right? Then what the test could do is they could run a probe function, and the probe function could be implemented using an exec, where literally the test at this struct itself literally said, okay, I know where the pod is for this particular logical thing that I want to confirm. And I'm just going to, my underlying implementation of this could be polling, but actually another way is when you tell me to probe, I will literally go and probe every single namespace for connectivity. And then I'll just like, you know, I'll just like give you back like a JSON of that, right? And so that every single pod, you could just logically ask it to give you an up-to-date state of affairs of who it can talk to, who it can't, right? That's my like perversion of what Shaun was talking about. I never like got to complete the entire conversation with him, but that's roughly. And I think that the nice thing about that is that's a very easy model to simulate and translate over to. You know, I'm doing a large-scale performance test, and I've got 40 of these policies, and I know that this test kind of breaks, and now I can kind of jump into any one of these pods and see who it can talk to and who it can't.
Yeah.
And I can kind of use it the same way when I'm hacking around with stuff as the end-to-end tests do.
So that like helps so that we're not, you know, creating and tearing down a pod for every single entry in that connectivity matrix.
So it means you're not sitting around for 2 hours. Exactly. Yeah. In addition to knowing you're not sitting around for 2 hours, though, you've got a test that when it fails, it's very easy to perturb that test in a way that you can manually trigger the various steps in it that cause that failure.
Yeah, I think what the tests do now is they launch a pod, and the pod either succeeds or fails based on whether it can talk to something.
Yeah.
And if you've got a slow
Kubernetes API to figure out whether it succeeded or failed, and
exactly. And the problem,
time.
And the problem with that is, you know, if you got like a slow etcd or something, then you've got these timeouts that happen, and you know, and the irony is that on a cluster where you're going to see network policies failing is also going to be a cluster where other things might possibly be going wrong, and so having that reliance on pod startup times and stuff can give you a very blurry result.
Well, I think this all sounds very exciting, especially faster tests. Have you, I don't think I've seen you on the SIG network call yet, but that's probably a good place to bring this once you've got a CEP or just a mailing list even to say, hey, look at this.
Yeah, that's the next step. I definitely, I think that's the next step for sure. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll do that for sure next time around. I forgot about the last SIG network call. So, but evidently y'all triaged one of my issues though, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, I'll be there next time, and I'll try to bring this up. I appreciate that, Casey. Hopefully you can help us, get some other eyes on this and help move it forward. I'd love to show you more if you're interested, or anybody else.
Jay, can you share the link to that document in the meeting notes also? So
Absolutely.
That we have a record of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So I think now we just have time for any other Q&A or general discussion. I have one question if nobody else has any. Jay, did you use a tool to make those ASCII art diagrams, or did you do it by hand?
Yeah, I used Asciiflow Infinity. It's cool. Yeah, I'll actually, since I'm still showing my screen, it's asciiflow.com. Yeah, so you go here and do that.
Cool.
And
that was my only question.
Yeah, you can draw like squares and stuff like that.
Very nice. I'm pretty sure we have some giant ASCII things in our comments that Shaun actually made by hand.
For the calc module in Felix.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he might also have like a file that you can feed into GraphViz.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would like something else, but
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I think we are at the end of our meeting. When do we do this? The third Wednesday of every month. or second Wednesday. So we'll be probably March 11th. Will be the next one. Thank you everybody for coming. See you on the internet.
Bye, everybody.